This program is presented by Birch Gold Group, the precious metal IRA specialists.
And we speak to a best-selling author about his new book on President Abraham Lincoln. We found out why he chose Lincoln as his main character and what it is he wants people to know about the president.
Good morning. Welcome to NTD. I'm Kevin Hogan.
Good morning. I'm Evelyn Lee. Today is Friday, February 10th, and we're starting off today's program with some news from the Capitol. The House passed a joint resolution yesterday to block a D.C. law that gives non-citizens the right to vote. The law would allow illegal immigrants and foreign employees at embassies who are openly hostile to the U.S. to take part in local elections. The resolution was introduced by Republican Representative James Comer. Here's what he had to say before the vote.
Our nation's capital city plays host to hundreds of foreign organizations and embassies. Many of these foreign nationals have interests directly opposed to those of the United States. They make no claim otherwise. For years, my Democrat colleagues have decried potential foreign influence in our electoral process. But D.C.'s new law potentially allows foreign agents from China, Russia, and other adversaries to participate in local elections held within this nation's capital city.
Local officials had urged members of Congress not to get involved in city matters. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said it was Congress's responsibility to intervene. He said the act from the Washington Council would dilute the vote of American citizens and endanger city residents and businesses. Over 40 Democrats voted in favor of the resolution. Senator Tom Cotton will introduce a version of the resolution in the Senate. President Biden will need to sign off if it passes to prevent the D.C. law from taking effect.
The House also passed a resolution yesterday to overturn a D.C. law that would rewrite the city's criminal code. It would reduce criminal penalties. Over 30 House Democrats voted in support. New information is out on the capabilities of the Chinese spy balloon that hovered over the U.S. Senior administration officials from the White House briefed senators on the issue yesterday. NTD's Melina Wisecup reports.
New details emerging on the CCP's spy balloon, uncovering the first proof that it was indeed on an espionage mission because it did contain devices meant to intercept sensitive communications. A State Department official speaking anonymously to the Epoch Times said that it had multiple antennas to include an array likely capable of collecting and geolocating communications. It was also equipped with solar panels large enough to produce enough power to operate multiple active intelligence collection sensors. The Chinese regime is now accusing the U.S. of engaging in information warfare against China because these new discoveries directly contradict the previous claim by China that this was a weather balloon. Senators did receive a closed-door briefing by White House officials on the issue, and after that briefing, I asked many senators what is their current assessment of the level of threat that this balloon posed, and we got mixed reactions. Here's a look.
Whether there was a threat or not, and I don't believe there was a threat, there wasn't.
I also think there was a real threat to civil aviation. If not, why did the FAA issue ground stoppages? There are airplanes in parts of the country that couldn't fly for a defined period of time.
Even what I am saying, they didn't send it over here by accident.
Number one takeaway is that the Chinese Communist Party, on issues like this, they don't tell the truth, right? They lie.
I think the balloon presented a very low level threat. In the aftermath of this story, we can maybe talk about the real threats posed to the United States by China.
Other activities like what?
Well, like their propaganda efforts, like the amount of fentanyl that's being sent from China into the United States.
This is believed to be just a part of the communist regime's fleet of balloons that has been in operation for several years, traveling across at least 40 countries. I asked a few senators how they believe Western countries should respond now. Here's what they told me.
We need to come together and recognize that there is really clear and present danger, increasingly so. They are a persistent threat. My question really is why we are so late to the game.
The entire civilized world should recognize that communist China is probably the gravest threat we've ever faced, more severe than Soviet Russia was. So we should take every step we can to try to reduce our dependency on China, to try to build stronger military deterrence against them, and make it clear that we're going to defend freedom in the civilized world.
The House, on a vote of 419-0, decried this act by the CCP as a brazen violation of U.S. sovereignty. And while both parties have disagreements about whether or not the administration handled this specific issue appropriately, there is more of a bipartisan consensus about the need for the U.S. to counter China more broadly. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
And moving on, we have some updates from the earthquake. Emergency crews made a series of dramatic rescues in Turkey today. Several people were pulled from the rubble 4 days after the catastrophic earthquake killed more than 20,000 people. Despite fears that it may be too late, hopes are still high that more will be found. Here's NTD's Cost Jimenez.
The search for survivors goes on in Turkey and Syria. It's been 4 days since the tragic earthquake that's claimed over 20,000 lives. Dramatic footage provided by the White Helmets shows volunteers rescuing 2 young girls from a collapsed structure in Canderis. Rescuers broke into cheers after saving a child from the rubble in the Turkish city of Kahramanmaraş. On Wednesday, the Israeli army rescue team pulled a 2-year-old baby out alive from under the rubble in the same city. Video shows rescuers pulling a 12-year-old boy from debris and carrying him before putting him on a stretcher. The rescue of survivors lifted the spirits of weary search crews as hopes were fading that more would be found alive. A little boy smiled as rescuers pulled him out from the rubble of a collapsed building along with other members of his family. Rescue efforts continue despite the 72-hour rule. Israeli rescue and medical teams say they've rescued 10 civilians in Turkey. This video shows a rescuer in tears after a girl was pulled from a collapsed building. In Azmarin, a village near the Syrian city of Idlib, volunteers rescued a young child. A visibly scared dog was saved in Turkey's İskenderun. The number of those injured in both countries now stands at more than 60,000. Authorities say more than 6,000 buildings have collapsed in Turkey. Countless more were damaged. The quake zone is home to more than 10 million people. The number of those who've perished has now exceeded the death toll of Turkey's 1999 earthquake, which killed around 18,000 people. Cost Jimenez, NTD News.
EU President Ursula von der Leyen said today a consensus was reached on border security. EU leaders agreed to tighten their borders to keep away unwanted immigrants. Illegal immigration has been a highly sensitive topic in the EU since 2015. A massive wave of over 1 million people flooded the continent at that time. Some were fleeing the war in Syria, others left Africa in search of greener pastures. Member states fought bitterly over how to provide for them. The EU imposed mandatory refugee quotas, but Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic rejected the quotas. Unable to agree, the bloc of 450 million people has turned to tightening its borders.
I think it is very important that the European Council has clearly recognized that migration is a European challenge that requires a European response. Borders must be managed. We will act to strengthen our external borders and prevent irregular migration.
Now, von der Leyen outlined concrete border plans, including watchtowers and electronic surveillance. She also mentioned that return decisions made in one member state will be valid in all member states.
In related news, passport stamps could be on the way out for EU visitors. A new automated entry and exit system is set to launch in November. It will register travelers digitally. Now back in the States, conservative commentator Matt Walsh testified before Tennessee lawmakers this week. He spoke in support of a bill to ban gender reassignment surgeries for minors. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more.
The bill has moved quickly through both chambers, and a full vote could happen as early as next week. The legislation was proposed after last fall's controversy over Vanderbilt University Medical Center. The institute was providing gender reassignment treatments to teenagers. Conservatives alleged Vanderbilt pushed the treatments as a money-making scheme. It was Matt Walsh who first exposed the hospital's programs in a series of tweets in late September.
Just curious of your definition of if you feel like people are adults at 16 should...
Well, people are adults at 18, but actually your brain is not fully developed until you're 25. So we should be having a conversation about whether we should even be doing these surgeries to people at 18.
Walsh called performing such medical surgeries before someone is 18, quote, absurd.
Do you think that a 16-year-old can meaningfully consent to having their body parts removed? Do you? No?
State Representative John Ray Clemens asked Walsh about his educational background.
Well, my background that qualifies me to speak to this is that I'm a human being with a brain and common sense, and I have a soul. And so, therefore, I think it's a really bad idea to chemically castrate children. That is my experience.
Meanwhile, a former case manager at the Washington University Transgender Center at St. Louis Children's Hospital, Jamie Reed, says what is happening to children there is morally and medically appalling. Reed resigned in November after 4 years. She says she was struck by the lack of formal protocols for treatment. One of her jobs was to do intake for new patients and their families. She says sometimes clusters of girls arrived from the same high school, and many had multiple comorbidities such as depression, anxiety, ADHD, and eating disorders. Many were also diagnosed with autism. For transitioning, she says patients needed a letter of support from a therapist, usually one the hospital recommended. They only had to see the therapist once for the green light. The next step was a single visit to the endocrinologist for a testosterone prescription, and that's all it took. Reed says patients were told about some side effects, including sterility, but she now believes that teenagers are simply not capable of fully grasping what it means to make the decision to become infertile while still a minor. The hospital's website says not receiving support that upholds their gender identity puts the physical and mental health of kids at risk. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
And some business news, global media and tech company Yahoo says it plans to cut more than 20% of its workforce. The layoffs are part of a major restructuring of its ad tech division. The company announced the move yesterday. The cuts will impact close to 50% of its ad tech employees by the end of this year. That includes around 1,000 employees this week. Yahoo says it's looking to narrow its focus and investment on its flagship ad business DSP. That's short for demand-side platform. Yahoo is owned by private equity firm Apollo Global Management. They acquired them in a $5 billion buyout from Verizon in 2021. Apollo reported its fourth quarter earnings yesterday and fell short of Wall Street expectations. Apollo shares dropped by around 6.5%. And many advertisers are reducing their marketing budgets in response to record high inflation rates and uncertainty about a recession.
A slew of U.S. companies from Alphabet to Goldman Sachs have also laid off thousands this year to ride out a downturn in demand. And coming up, we speak to a best-selling author about his new book on President Abraham Lincoln. We find out why he chose Lincoln as his main character and what it is he wants people to know about the president after the break.
I was vaccinated because I'm a carer.
I've had all three and I have the flu one as well.
As far as the government is concerned, I believe they are doing the best thing for the nation.
I just thought it was better that I get it done. I wanted to protect other people.
The COVID vaccine has been hailed as a medical and logistical success. It's claimed that millions of lives have been saved, but there's growing evidence that the jab can have devastating consequences.
They actually told my wife and two children that they had no hope, and if I did survive, it would be from the waist up.
You take one for the team, so I took the vaccine, but now the team's run in the opposite direction.
Just to let people know that when it goes wrong, there's like no help at all.
This vaccine is not completely safe and has unprecedented harms.
Welcome back. Did you know it's President Abraham Lincoln's birthday on Sunday? The president has inspired many movies and books, and New York Times bestselling author John Cribb was so inspired by him that he came out with 2 books about him. After years of research, I asked him why he chose Lincoln as his main character and what it is he wants people to know about the president. Take a look.
Yeah, I tried very hard and spent a long time researching his life and times to really make this an accurate portrayal of Lincoln's life and times. So, he's not chasing zombies or killing vampires or anything like this in these historical novels. This is, I think, the real Lincoln. And the Rail Splitter, which is the one that's just come out, starts him off as a teenager on the Indiana frontier. And there's a date at the top of each chapter to let you know what's happening. And so you're with him every page as he, kind of makes his way from the woods of Indiana to the prairies of Illinois and then the threshold of the White House, and then in the old day with him for the last 5 years of his life. But this is the real Lincoln in these 2 books. And I used, as much as I could, I used primary source documents to build the dialogue and the descriptions of scenes to make it accurate.
First, let's delve into a little bit more into his character. So you said that you really tried to bring his character to life. So tell me more about what kind of a man you think he was. How did you portray him in your book?
Yeah. Of course, he was a human being. He was flawed like all of us, but I think was really a great man. And I think that he possessed and acquired, as he was growing up on the frontier, a set of virtues in his character, like perseverance and hard work and a burning eagerness to learn. Virtues like that really propelled him to the White House and in the end made him the great president and leader that he was. When he got to the White House and became president, the Civil War broke out right away. And listen, as that war dragged on and got worse and worse and bloodier, there were many times when people in the North said to him, just stop. This isn't worth it. All this death and bloodshed. Let the South go. Let them have their slaves. Let them have their own country. And Lincoln said, no, we're going to hold this nation together. He used to tell people when he was president, he said, I'm like a man trying to keep a tent up in a storm. And he said, I get the tent all staked down to the ground, and the storm comes along and the wind blows out one of the tent stakes. And I grab a hammer and I peg it back into the ground. And as soon as I get it in and the tent back up, the wind blows out another tent stake. So I run around to the other side of the tent and I peg it back down, and then it blows out another tent stake and I peg it back down. And he told people, that's all I do all day long is I keep pegging away. And he said, that's what I mean to keep doing, pegging away. So he really is a model of perseverance.
Yeah, and when we would compare his personality, let's say in your newest book, which plays out before his presidency, as you say, and versus his personality during the last 5 years of his life, how were they different?
Well, I tell you, one really fascinating thing to watch during that journey he makes from a log cabin to the White House is that Lincoln starts out as a young fellow like all of us, I guess. The questions he's asking himself are, how am I going to make my way in life? How am I going to get off the farm? Because he really did not want to be a farmer. Where am I going to live? How am I going to get a girl? Who am I going to marry? Those kind of questions, which are important questions for all of us to ask and answer. But as he grows, we gradually see him finding and attaching himself to a cause that is greater than himself. And that, of course, turns out to be the cause of liberty and the cause of country, a cause that he ultimately gives his life for. And watching this, very driven, but at times very callow and sometimes directionless young person gradually find something larger than the self and attach himself to that, I think is also a great lesson for all of us. I mean, there are a lot of small things that surprised me, like, twice when Lincoln was a young fella living out on the frontier, he and buddies built flatboats and loaded them with frontier produce and floated all the way down the Mississippi River to New Orleans to sell them. And on one of those trips, he was attacked by river pirates. I mean, just lots of fun things like that. But I think in a larger sense, the thing that really surprised me was that once he got into the White House and was president and plunged into that awful war, what a man of deep faith he became. He really he turned to the Bible a lot try to spend time with it every day, and pondering, looking for answers to questions in the Bible and asking again and again, what is God's will? And I think his faith in the end ends up supplying a lot of the strength that he needs to make it through that awful war, and gives him a lot of the wisdom that he needed to be such a great president.
And how does it play into today? I mean, why is it important to you to bring more attention to this part of history, to him as a person, the values and the wisdom, as you say?
Yeah, I think he is such an inspiring story, and generations of Americans have been inspired by Lincoln and his story, and I don't want us to lose that. And that journey that he made from the log cabin to the White House that I tell in The Rail Splitter is such a remarkable journey. It is in a lot of ways the story of the American dream. I worry that today sometimes young people aren't getting that message. I worry that sometimes they're hearing too much negativity. They're hearing messages that the American dream is dead, or it isn't what it used to be, or it was a phony, it was never around, or that, the system's rigged against you, or you're a victim. And these messages are not helpful. They hold people back, I think. I think we need more inspiration to lead us forward. And Lincoln's story really is an amazingly inspiring story.
Well, thank you so much, John Cribb, for your time today. Great books about a great man. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on.
This is Stephen K. Bannon. I urge you to protect your savings from inflation by diversifying into a physical gold IRA from Birch Gold Group. Simply text the word NTD to 989898 and you'll get a free info kit on gold IRAs explaining everything.
By donating a Lord card to NTD, you'll be supporting real news and free speech. We pick up free and provide documents for tax deduction, making your life easier. Donate your card now, call 833-33-NTD-TV.
Good to have you back with us. As the Super Bowl nears, players are preparing to give it their best, but they're not the only ones who need to be ready. Football injuries are common, so the NFL's medical team is on standby to deal with sudden illness and injuries. NTD's Cost Temenes tells us more about the medical response team's toolkit.
This Sunday's Super Bowl game in Glendale, Arizona will feature the battle between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. But despite being the highlight of many players' careers, for NFL medical officials, it's just like every other game.
We prepare for it and plan for it just like we do every single game. And really every week and every game is our Super Bowl. By that I mean we have to be prepared for a catastrophic event or illness. And if that occurs, we have to function at the highest level.
The medical team has put in place a number of measures on and off the field. The blue tent is the sideline concussion examination space.
This tent is mandatory for all of our sideline concussion evaluations. Sometimes it's used for other evaluations, like they might come in here to do an orthopedic exam or some other exam.
Concussions jumped by nearly 20% during the 2022 regular season. A concussion suffered by a Miami Dolphins quarterback last year prompted the NFL and Players Union to adopt enhanced concussion protocols. Alongside the concussion tent, the medical team has access to a sideline video replay system. It helps demonstrate injuries to the sideline medical staff of both teams. In addition, there's also a spotter booth.
We have 69 field-facing camera views that we have to choose from. Now, we don't look through all 69 during a game, but there's usually 4 or 5 views that are going to give us the best view and best angle to see certain things.
Referees can be notified by a medical timeout button should any players display injury behavior. Off the field, a room is on reserve for what's called the 60-minute meeting. In the pre-game meeting, medical officials and independent medical personnel gather to discuss players' health and identify each person's role in an emergency, allowing for better overall coordination and communication. Cost Temenes, NTD News.
And now we're going to meet the world's oldest dog on record. The purebred Portuguese Mastiff named Bobi is almost 31 years old. The dog was born in a tiny village in central Portugal, and thanks to him, the remote village is now on the map. Bobi has broken the Guinness World Record for being the oldest dog. He celebrated his 30th birthday last year. The previous record was held by an Australian cattle dog for almost a century. He died at the age of 29 years old in 1939. Although Bobi still loves walks, age is taking its toll. The dog is less adventurous, its fur is thinning, its eyesight has worsened, and it needs to rest more than it used to. Bobi's breed usually has a life expectancy of 12 to 14 years. Owner Leonel Costa attributed the dog's longevity to a number of factors, and that includes living in a calm countryside and never having been chained up or kept on a leash.
Of course, our love and affection throughout his life has also helped, but he is the builder of this deed.
Evelyn, I guess all that freedom really did him some good. And, a 30-year-old dog, that's the first time I've heard of that.
For sure, yeah. And Bobi actually has a really touching story. The Guinness World Records called his story miraculous. At the time Bobi was born, Costa's family had many animals and just little money. So Costa was only 8 at the time. His father was a hunter, and generally he tended to bury the newborn puppies instead of keeping them. But Bobi hid among a pile of firewood, and Costa and his siblings found him a few days later, and of course they kept it a secret just until the puppy opened its eyes.
Ah, what an interesting story.
I know, right?
Yeah.
All right, that's all for today's program. We'd love to hear from you. You can share your thoughts and your story at goodmorning@ntd.com. Shoot us an email if you'd like. Thanks for watching. I'm Evelyn Lee.
And I'm Kevin Hogan.
Thanks for watching us on YouTube. Did you know YouTube only keeps selective videos on its platform? So if you want to make sure you get the full picture, just subscribe to our newsletter. Go to newsletter.ntd.com and sign up. It's free.